Hello everyone, how's everybody doing? Everybody enjoy the cold cuts for lunch? Yeah, that was tasty. No, we were just talking about it outside. Is that a couple years ago we were over at the Hilton downtown, and we used to have like big pizza trays and everything brought in, you know, and we'd have tacos and we'd have spaghetti and stuff like that. And we're like, oh man, those were the days. Anyways, my name is Mike Nelson. I'm going to be talking about Hyper-V for all you VMware administrators, if there are any in the audience, which I think there are. And I've had a great year, actually. Had a couple personal things happen, and also I've been awarded the vExpert for 2013 again, along with the CTP. I'm now part of the CTP group, which is really cool. Yeah, thank you. You can reach me at NellMedia on Twitter if you want, or you can send me an email. I work for a company called Nginx. You've probably seen a couple of us here. What we do is, you know, we are a service provider and a consulting firm. And we've probably seen Henrik Johansson or Rick Dillinger. They're my bosses. So, but what we're going to talk about here, we're going to talk about Hyper-V. How many people in here are VMware administrators? Okay. How many have Hyper-V? Cool. How many have some other flavor of hypervisor? Zen Server, Red Hat, KVM, something like that? VirtualBox, whatever you have. Okay. What we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about how you as VMware administrators are going to tackle this monster called Hyper-V. Now, a lot of us were brought up with with VMware being the only thing we really started our virtualization careers on. Not a lot of people know that virtualized servers, or the hypervisor, was actually born back in 1980. You know, IBM actually had the hypervisor back then, but it wasn't as prevalent as, you know, 5, 6, 8 years ago when VMware busted into the scene and said, look at this, we got GSX server, it's awesome, you got to try it. That was their first attempt at it, and then ESX came after that. But as some of you, I am sure, that was your first introduction to a hypervisor. Am I right? Pretty much? Yeah. So you were kind of born and raised on that. And to tell you the truth, the marketing folks and the executives at VMware are hoping and praying that that's true, and that you don't want to give that up. Okay? Because then you hate Hyper-V. You hate Microsoft. They suck. Yeah. But the reality is that whether you like it or not, from your position, if you have any control over it at all, is you will probably be managing multiple hypervisors in your data center. You, like I said, may not have any control over it. And the reason for that is because it might be out of your control when the software-defined data center actually becomes a reality for you. In terms of, it doesn't matter what you think. It only matters what the software wants. So if the finance team wants a shiny new, brand new application that comes prepackaged from Microsoft under a SKU called Complete Financial System, and when it gets delivered off the skid, it's like a V-block. I don't know if you're familiar with what a V-block is. A V-block is a completely configured piece of hardware that comes off a skid. You plug in the power, you plug in the network, and boom, you got an operating virtualization platform. Microsoft is trying to do the same thing, in my opinion and a few others. They're going to, what they do, commoditize the hypervisor. And what they're trying to do is basically say, we're going to sell you this, and it's all going to be in a package. And the finance people are going to go, yeah, this is cool. All we're going to do is tell IT that this thing's coming, it's going to be on the dock, they got to plug it in, and then it's ours. They don't touch it. Well, guess what? That thing is running Hyper-V. It's not running VMware. When something breaks, guess who they're going to call? You. How come I can't get this virtual machine to start? Oh, let me take a look at it. What the? I can't see that host in vCenter. Well, that's because you can't manage it in vCenter. Okay. That's just my little soapbox get on. Now I'm getting off, and we'll move on. So this is a crash course. I'm going to go over basically a lot of the basics of what you know today and what you're going to need to know for tomorrow in order to effectively start your journey, and I emphasize start your journey into managing Hyper-V. The reason is because you had a long time to look at VMware and vCenter and how to manage all those moving parts and pieces. Guess what? You're going to need the same amount of time to do it with Hyper-V. So it's not going to be an overnight thing. I can tell you that right now. How many folks attended the incomparable ultra intelligent Mike Burke's session earlier on Hyper-V and System Center? I only say that because Mike's sitting right back there. I'm sucking up to him. No. He outlined a lot of the things that are coming in Hyper-V, right? And he even compared some against the current vSphere 5.1. You're going to see some of the same slides that Mike showed. But I'm going to be emphasizing some different points, more points that relate to you and what you do. Okay? So, to start, we're going to talk about some quick questions I'm going to ask you, which I've already pretty much asked. A little history, just not enough time. I'll explain that later. Differences and similarities, and the vAdmin and managing the mess. The vAdmin is something that I coined, which I can't get trademarked, and nobody really listens to me anyways, but the vAdmin are you guys, the virtual administrators. You got VMware, you know, V this, vSphere, vCenter, V. Why not vAdmin? Just me. So the questions I had, I've pretty much already asked. What I do need to ask, though, is does anybody know that they have possibly another department that's going to be putting in Hyper-V in their data center? Or they've heard a rumor that you're going to have to learn how to manage Hyper-V, or your boss has come to you and said, guess what? Or you are the boss, and you have to learn Hyper-V.
Solution partner driving.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Well, and yeah, and I mean, think about it too. I don't know how many people in here are partners or consultants. I mean, you're going to have to learn that. You're going to have to teach it. So, Microsoft came on the scene, and when they first came out with Hyper-V, everybody thought it was a joke. VMware preyed on that. VMware pounded it. VMware said, you have no idea what the hell you guys are doing. Get out of the business. We own it. The small little puppy was Microsoft. The big one was VMware. Well, guess what? Hyper-V has evolved. And over the 5 years ago, I can tell you right now, there was a podcast, and there was 3 or 4 people that were industry experts at the time that were on there that were saying, well, Hyper-V will never catch up to VMware. My opinion, bull. They've already caught up to at least a year behind VMware, where VMware is today. And they did it all by creating their own hypervisor from scratch, just like VMware did. What Microsoft wants to do is basically set up these little lemonade stands and say, hey, buddy, you want a hypervisor? Huh? We can give you a hypervisor. Boy, if you buy one of these other products, we'll give it to you too. And they want to call it a commodity. They want to commoditize the hypervisor so you don't even think about what hypervisor is running underneath the sheets. VMware doesn't like that. They come back and they say, no, 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 no. People should have a choice. They should know what kind of hypervisor they're running. That's wrong. I don't know. How many times today do you buy, do you have something that you own? You really don't care who makes it as long as it works. Really. Do I really care sometimes? I mean, I'm building a new house. Do I really care what kind of refrigerator I have? Not really. I just want to make sure it works. I want it to last a long time. And what Microsoft in their infinite wisdom did was go to vendors like Cisco and say, hey, What if we throw our hypervisor on your nice little UCS platform that you got going on there, and we ship it all in one big package like I mentioned before as a vBlock? People won't even know. That's what they're doing. A lot of people are sitting over here in the VMware bowl. And a lot of people that in the industry, the bloggers, the writers, the consultants, the people that talk to Microsoft and tell them, you know, what the average Joe feels about the hypervisor, they're starting to jump ship, one or two of them. And it's when you get the big names, that's when the people stand up and go, oh my God, something's happening. Paul Moritz retired last year. How many of you know that? What an opportune time to retire. Just throwing that out there.
Don't forget about this year.
What's that?
Don't forget about this year.
Yeah. It was Steve. Steve Hurd? Yep. Lots of changes happen at VMware. Some people are actually seeing the light. So that's what a lot of people are doing, is they're jumping between. They're saying, you know what? We don't care. Or I have no control over it is another term, because they really don't. You as administrators, as system administrators, or if you're just IT folks, or if you're data center people, or if you're Citrix people, or if you're, you know, whatever role you play, you don't necessarily have a choice of what goes, you know, what you're using. You just have to do with what they give you, right? So we'll look at the technical differences. I am going to fly through some of this stuff, only because it's boring as hell if you sit there and go on every single one of them. But if anybody, as interactive as I love these things to be, if you have any questions on it, please don't hesitate to ask, all right? But I am going to cruise through these a little bit, just so you know. Mike, if you were in his session, he did them a little deeper. I don't want to go that deep. It's like, I got more stuff to do. That's where I'm saying, sorry, we'll talk about it, I'll fly through it. I will say that there is a website out there called the Virtualization Matrix. If you go out there, it tells you complete, side by side, not only Hyper-V and VMware, it also does VirtualBox, it also does Xen, it also, you know, you name it. Side by side comparison as much as you can, depending on what the vendors, you know, call this, call that, what they do with this, do with that. They try and get you can only get as close as possible. Okay. How many people have heard of Hayden? You've heard? Okay. This guy, he's like, you know, above and beyond. Some of the stuff he writes is just phenomenal. But he actually has an up-to-date, just published, 621. They're comparing the 22 Hyper-V, R2 Hyper-V. Now this is R2. This is not just 2012. This is R2 to vSphere 5.1. And he has a really good article about it. Now obviously he sits on the Microsoft side. He's a Microsoft MVP. So right away he calls out the, what do you call them? V fanboys. Okay? He calls out the V fanboys will attempt to post anyways. And he does get into kind of bashing VMware. I don't play with that. I mean, that's a personal thing. I sit on both sides of the fence. I like everything. But he's really a good resource if you want to go check him out. The thing that people that have to realize is that when you're talking about Hyper-V and you're talking about vSphere, you're really comparing apples to oranges. You're not comparing apples to apples. Can anybody tell me why that is? What the basic technology difference between the two hypervisors? Nobody knows. Oh, yeah. You're disqualified. Yes?
Does it, Hyper-V have to be stood up on top of Microsoft?
I have to, hang on one sec. I apologize, and I'm moving. Don't follow me with the camera. I don't want you to follow me around. I have a problem with my ears, so if I have to walk up and ask you what you just said, please don't get pissed at me, but go ahead.
Isn't Hyper-V more of a role that's installed on top of an OS as opposed to ESXi, which goes right on a bare metal?
That's true, but that's at a higher level. I'm talking about the core base layer of the hypervisor. Anybody know what that is? Go ahead, Mike.
Microkernel, hypervisor versus a monolithic.
Oh, dude. Right on. So, VMware vSphere uses something called a monolithic design in their hypervisor. This is getting kind of deep for some, but in a monolithic design, you have the controlling layer, you have the hypervisor layer, you have the components, the network stack, storage stacks, and such, and the hardware layer. Notice on the hardware layer, we have a physical network and storage devices, right? Why is that? Because those require specific device drivers to communicate with those devices, right? Notice up at the controlling layer, you have the VMs, but then you also have the main partition, okay, which is, if you're familiar with Zen, it's called DOM0. You know, it's a controlling partition, the main partition. Well, when you look at hyperV, the difference is it's microkernelized, which means it still has the same hardware layer, although it talks differently to the hardware. But if you look up here, the controlling layer, it's huge. Everything resides within the controlling layer. And to put these side by side, you can see the difference. The hypervisor layer is very small. You have the network stack, storage stack, 600 KB. And here you have all of this, the product components, the device drivers, you know, the code is 32 meg. That's the biggest layer. In hyperV, the controlling layer is the biggest layer. In efficiency in communicating with hardware, this is more efficient in communicating directly with hardware. The reason for that is because you're talking about drivers, device drivers that are in the main partition in the OS that can talk directly down to the hypervisor layer with all the components in. It doesn't have to cross layer. This is talking device drivers. It has to go through the components down to the hardware layer, right? But it's not up in the controlling layer. It doesn't control what's in the virtual machine stack. It doesn't communicate directly with the virtual machines. It has to go from one layer to another. That's where I talk about the differences in monolithic. You got code injection in the hypervisor layer, which is, these are pluses and minuses. Requires compatible hardware, no security patches or operating system required in the controlling layer. vSphere, when you install vSphere, what are you installing? When you put that DVD in or you put the ISO in, what are you actually installing? Remember when it used to be called the Service Console in ESX? What's in ESXi? Anybody? Nobody? Okay.
It's a BSD-based management partition.
One more time, Mike.
It's a Linux BSD-based.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The base Linux configured, pre-configured, okay, is thrown in there. All right? So there's no security patches or operating system required in the controlling layer. In the operating system layer, the Linux, it is, but not in the controlling layer. When you talk about here, there's no code injection possible in the hypervisor layer, okay, because the components aren't there. Then the device drivers don't need to be hypervisor aware, because why? They're in the controlling layer, and they're talking directly to the VMs. And the controlling layer requires an OS, which is less secure. vSphere doesn't require a operating system per se in order to function. So we're going to look real quick at the deployment options. How many of you do auto deploy in your VMware? Do you? Okay, so how many of you just have some way of automatically deploying? Do you put, or I should say, how many are still putting like DVDs in and building your host that way? Really? Well, no, I mean, you know, yeah, that's the reality of sometimes, you know. It's really easy to auto deploy now, but. So in hyperV, you can do DVDs, USB, PXE, all that kind of stuff. vSphere is pretty much the same thing. Notice one thing on the hyperV side is that they have come out with a new deployment toolkit, 2013, which will do hyperV 2012 R2 as a deployment option. So, which is coming to your retail store shortly. Technical comparisons, I just highlighted a couple. These are the ones I said we're going to fly over. Logical processors is the same thing that Mike showed, so if you fall asleep during this, it's cool. The logical processors is a huge difference there between a hyperV in R2 and vSphere. Now, this is not to say that in the next 2.5 weeks, what's in the next 2.5 weeks? Anybody tell me? There you go. So who's in the next 2.5 weeks? That's not to say that something is going to be announced at the conference happening in San Francisco that may change all this. Okay. Physical memory, 4 terabyte to 2 terabyte. Active VMs per host, 1024 to 512. Maximum VMs and supported operating system. Let me ask you a question real quick. I was going to say it in his session, but I didn't want to disrupt it. How many people run 1024 hosts, or guests on a host? It's like Mike said, you will never get there. Maybe if you're like, you know, Boeing or somebody like that. But, you know, you'll never get, how many are going to run 8,000 in a cluster? Holy crap. If you do, I feel sorry for you. Resource comparison, yeah, not much difference there. The biggest difference being dynamic memory versus overcommit. Ballooning, if you will, which we can talk about if you like. Guest migration, you can do 1 gig simultaneous, is unlimited, where in vSphere you can only do 4. How many people have tried to do more vMotions than what's, I mean, I don't know how many people have tried to do this, but I've like set up like 10 machines to try and vMotion at one time. You get that queued. Just takes frickin' forever, right? I got to tell you, in hyperV R2 that I have in my lab, that stuff just flies, man. I mean, it just flies. But, you know, it's a 10 gig lab, so I don't know if you have 10 gig networks, but if you do, it's awesome. Storage options, hyperV. One of the biggest things is that they have the VHDs and VHDXs now. VHDX is just a expanded VHD where it gives all the capabilities. The new capabilities of R2 and 2012. In vSphere, it's really cool. You can do NFS in vSphere. You can't do that in hyperV. Not yet, but you can't do it. What's that?
You use SMP, though.
Yeah, SMB, yeah, exactly. And they also have something called thick provision, lazy eager zeroed, which I don't know if a lot of people use, but when you're dealing with storage issues, you really want to make sure that you use that. And they have link clones, which hyperV still doesn't have. So, again, I'm not going to go over every one of these. I'm sure everybody's going, thank you very much, but a quick glance. Tier storage pooling, which is really cool. That's a new feature where you can actually do the pooling on a tiered level. You know, if you do gold, silver, you know, that type of tiering, or 1, 2, 3, or however you tier your storage. Maximum virtual disk size. If any one of you ever puts a 64 terabyte disk on a machine, you deserve whatever you get. I mean, that's ridiculous.
On the flip side, I'm constantly needing more than 2 terabytes.
I'm sorry,
I'm constantly needing more than 2 terabytes.
absolutely. 2 terabytes, I can understand.
That limit is ridiculous.
64 terabyte, you'll never hit it, never. Scalability. This is really critical for people who have, you know, smaller installations and they want to grow, or they don't know if they're going to be acquiring other data centers that might be running VMware or hyperV. High availability, pretty much the same. Mike really pointed out the NIC teaming part in hyperV. I want to make a point on that, is that you really have to, he made a point that you have to be careful about the device drivers, because you need specific device drivers, and that is true. I will tell you this, is that R2, that is going to be a lot more lenient in R2. Networking, how many people have used distributed switch in VMware and vSphere? Not the default vSwitch, the distributed switch. How many use a Cisco Nexus? V1000. Oh, yeah, you do. I know you. The Extensible Switch for hyperV, that's pretty much, you know, you don't need a 1000. You can use a 1000 with it now. But the Extensible Switch is completely scalable. Okay? A VMware vSwitch is not scalable. Okay? You have to rip it out and replace if it doesn't fit your needs. Integrating virtual machines. This is one of the tasks you have to do, install VMware tools, right? So you install VMware tools, it gives you the toolbox, device drivers, shared folders. I don't know, has anybody used Wise multimedia support? Anybody ever use that? I've never, ever installed that. Really? Wow. If you're running Citrix, you don't need that though, right, with HDX? Yeah, oh, okay. Oh, all right. So in Hyper-V, you do the same thing. They're called integration services. Okay? So when you do your installation, if you right-click on the machine, which I can show you later, when you right-click on it, one of them is integration servers, and this stuff basically does the same thing. It'll integrate just like the tools. Okay? And the awesome thing about this is both from VMware and from Microsoft is both of them love Linux, which is really cool. Because you wouldn't think, I mean, VMware adopted Linux a long time ago. But Microsoft loving Linux, I think Ballmer sat up on stage at one point, like 4 or 5 years ago, and said, Linux is a devil. You know, and now they're embracing Linux. I gotta wait, he's gotta take a picture of this. You ready? Cool, all right. I'll wait for you, I will. Okay. So we're going to take a look right now at the operating system differences. When you as administrators have to decide at one point what operating systems you can actually support in your data centers, or what operating systems you want to support in your data centers. For vSphere 5.1, you have all these flavors of Linux. Notice I put this down there, because it really doesn't fit anywhere else, but that's what it supports on the Linux side. On the Windows side, all those. Now, anybody create a virtual machine with that? I have a DOS 6.55 virtual machine. It's awesome. I fire it up every once in a while just to bring back the old days. Anybody, if you ever do ME, don't even, you should leave now. What's that?
You have DOS, but you don't have ME.
That's right. And I almost put Microsoft Bob on. Just kidding. One of the asterisks you'll notice is Windows 8.x and then 2012 R2, because they still label it as experimental. They will not support it until the operating system is officially released, even though it works, trust me. How many people have actually worked with OS2 Warp? Awesome! That was like the coolest operating system ever. It was, well, it was, man. It was awesome. That's when we were still doing punch card and Novell servers. I'm really showing my age now. But it actually supports OS2 Warp. If you can find the media, which you can download from the internet of OS2 Warp, you can install a virtual machine of OS2 Warp, if you really want to. Now let's take a look at Hyper-V and how it compares. From a Hyper-V standpoint, that's it on the Linux side. That's all it supports. SUSE, Red Hat, and CentOS. What else? What do you think is on the Windows side? How many go away there? All but 4? What's the lowest version of Windows you think it supports? Pardon me?
7.
7? No, okay. The lowest version would be 7. We go to 2003 R2, 2003, 2000 NT. So you're saying?
I'll go with next door.
Okay. Burke, what do you say? Really?
Anything that's probably currently under support from Microsoft.
That's not true. That's not true. They will support operating systems that are not currently under support by a vendor, including themselves. Right there.
But just getting it.
2000 is supported.
Just getting it to run, though, right? Not,
That's right.
Not inside the thing itself.
What's that?
Hyper-V 2008 R2 didn't support Server 2000.
2008, what? 2012 does.
2008 R2 did not support Server 2000.
2012 does. It is listed as an operating system. If you go out to TechNet, it's listed as an operating system that's supported by 2012, Hyper-V 2012. R2. And that's probably because they had people bitching saying, I got 2,000 machines, I got to put on a hypervisor, so you guys got to support it.
You can't download Server 2000 anymore, and you can't do Windows Update on it anymore.
Yeah. Then you start getting into the other question, why? You know.
Download Windows 3.1. You can't download Server 2000.
Yeah. Oh. So what about these Hyper-V? These are things that Hyper-V has not addressed that are pretty much the same from VMware. Hot add, hot remove. That was a point of conversation in the previous session. Okay. Hyper-V does not support that yet on the CPU side. Excuse me. Fault tolerance. Its fault tolerance is what? Clustering, replication. It's not actually a fault tolerant, an FT machine that's in lockstep like VMware does, like vSphere does. Although in FT mode currently, and this may change in the next 2.5 weeks, it only supports a machine with one CPU. That's it. So if you have a machine that has 2 CPUs, it doesn't support it. FT will not function. DRS, there really is no DRS unless you have an orchestrated from orchestrator, SCVM orchestrator on the back end actually doing some kind of resource load balancing inside of a Hyper-V cluster, which orchestrator can do. It's just a script. Just goes out and looks at the, load on this box and a load on this box, and it's not real. It's not what we consider as people who grew up on vSphere, on VMware. It's not DRS. DPM. There is no DPM in Hyper-V. There's no power management in Hyper-V for the physical boxes. You have to rely on ILOs, DRACs, whatever. And data protection. That's another thing. Clustering is their data protection pretty much. Host profiles, templates, auto deployment, MDT, SCCM, that's pretty much it. What about you? What about the administrator? How do you handle all this crap that they're throwing at you? How do you go on with your job? How do you gain more knowledge and want to make more money and move up in your careers? Well, they want you to be like Superman. And I'm sorry, super ladies, sorry. And be able to do everything and anything that they want you to do, right? Or for you bosses that are out there, what you want your people to do. Now, I will say that my version of Superman is this guy. He's so cool. Iron Man, I'll throw that in there. He's cool. But I did give this session over in London earlier this year, and I revised it a little bit. But when I was in London, I was like, what kind of superheroes you got here in London? This is a superhero they have in London. Anybody from England here? No? This is Captain Britain. He's wearing an S, but he's got the British flag. They call him Captain Britain to the kids there over in England. And that's their hero. And then when the people in the audience were like, no, that's not our hero. This is our hero. Now, this is a guy that we like. And I said, which guy? You had like 10 of them. Which one? And I said, okay, I'll tell you what. I'll Google English hero and see what I get. All right? So this is what I got when I Googled English hero. I really, this is honest to God, this is what I got. And of course, this is Google UK, whatever, but it's, you know, they all, you know, they're all like, oh yeah, him, he was at the Olympics and he represents England. I'm like, that's your hero. Okay. So they want you to be just like him. No. The basics for everybody here. Many of the basic admin tasks are accomplished in similar ways. Others are not. You create a guest, power control, power off, power on, force guest shut down, all that kind of stuff. Guest settings, create the storage. Okay, creating storage is a little bit different. You're used to creating storage by having your storage people, or if you are the storage people, you present a LUN. You create a data store. Well, in Hyper-V, it's different. You're actually working off of LUNs, all right, that are put into, whether you're in a clustered environment or a non-clustered environment, which are put into volumes, so on and so forth. I can show you that. Connecting to a guest is pretty much, you know, you connect in vSphere, in the vSphere client, or the web client if you're so inclined. You connect to the guest. In Hyper-V, you connect to the guest, but you can't do pretty much jack inside of that session except, you know, control it. The clipboard sucks and everything else. So in the new version, you know, you really want to RDP into that guest. You don't want to connect to it from the console. Snapshots are pretty much the same. In vSphere, you got this nice little GUI that shows you a snapshot here, here, and here. In vSphere, you don't have that. You have this snapshot, and that's it. There's no description, there's no nothing. Tools installation, like I went over before. Resource allocation, that's just in a different spot. Okay, they call them different terms. We'll look at that. Updates and patches. Point of argument. I'm talking updates and patches of virtual machines, not updates and patches of the hypervisor. Okay? So on a virtual machine side, you have to use whatever you use, WSUS, I don't know, whatever you use to patch your boxes with, you know, that really doesn't change. Patching the actual hypervisor, you're talking about on the Hyper-V level, from a management perspective, Patch Tuesday, you know, the whole cycle. vSphere never came out with, I thought vSphere would come out with like a Patch Sunday, just to piss Microsoft off, but they didn't, you know, they just release them whenever. And if you have Update Manager, you don't even know what's happening, right? So. And templates and clones, which is really cool, and I know this was talked about too, is templates. They have a new thing with templates that's really awesome inside of Hyper-V. In vSphere, you create a template, right? It goes out and it creates a template of that machine, but you have to pre-configure that first, right? Well, in vSphere, you actually create a template and it can pre-install whatever you need. So it can, if you say I want a template of SQL, it'll install SQL into the machine and make it a template. Okay, so you don't have to go through the manual process. That can all be automated. All right? This is some of the terminology differences between the two that you're going to need to understand. Move guests, vMotion, live migration, storage, vMotion, quick storage migration. Another one, data center and fabric. You got to get used to that. They have the DRS, they actually call it Pro, Performance and Resource Optimizations. It's not the same as DRS, but that's partially the equivalent. You have resource allocation, reservation, and dynamic memory. And for DR, you have SRM and replica. Anybody running SRM? Really? Is that costing you like a fortune now per VM? Or is that cheaper for you? Yeah, kind of, sort of, maybe?
When it works.
Yeah, I hear you. I felt that pain, man. I know. That was just for my curiosity. Disk files, you're familiar? How many people actually go in and look at the VMX files or have to do something with them? Have ever done anything like that? You know, yeah, sometimes you have to go in and edit those things. In order to recover them, sometimes you have to go in and edit them just to get them to come back up, right? Well, in Hyper-V, they're just named a little bit differently. Okay, so this is a kind of a chart telling you what the differences are. One important thing to note is that Hyper-V uses VIB files for their driver files. Hyper-V uses INF, which is native to the Windows operating system, where vSphere uses VIBs. In Update Manager, you can do that automatic VIB upload from, like, if you use HP servers. It'll automatically go out to HP and upload the new drivers, the VIBs. How do we manage them? In vSphere, you can use vCenter, vCenter Client, vCLI, VMA, PowerCLI, and third parties. Anybody here using a third-party tool to completely manage their VMware environment? I didn't think so, because there isn't one that exists. There isn't. There is not one exists that will completely manage your environment as extensively as vCenter. And there's a reason for that. They want you to buy vCenter. HyperV, Virtual Machine Manager, VMM, it's also called HyperV Manager. People mix the terms up, because earlier when Hyper-V was first announced, they called it VMM, and then they wanted to give it to the the System Center group. System Center group said, yeah, we're going to call it SCVM. Well, SCVM turned out to be too long of an acronym, so now they just want to call it VMM, and the server team is saying, okay, we're going to rename our thing, and we're going to call it Hyper-V Manager, so la-di-da. You got to understand, Microsoft is pockets of people. That's how they operate. Failover Cluster Manager, that, if you've ever done SQL clustering or anything else with Microsoft, you should be familiar with that tool. The SCVM, the Service Console, there is a Service Console, just like vSphere, PowerShell, and then third party, 5.9s, HP Remote, vUtilities. Some of them are limited. They only do certain things. They won't do all things, but they'll do some things, just like on the vSphere side. Why not SCVM for VMware? According to VMware, this is according to VMware now. Why trying to use SCVM 2012 will frustrate vSphere administrators? That was the opening line of a white paper that they did. In this white paper, they continued on saying that Microsoft is trying to convince vSphere administrators to manage their VM, blah, 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 blah. Basically, it comes down to is that they're bashing that SC System Center can manage vCenter. I'm here to tell you it can. It cannot replace vCenter, but it can manage your VMware environment. Now, with that, I add on the little caveat. As long as your VMware environment is not like massive, then you run into problems. Okay? SCVM offers only rudimentary management capabilities for VMware environments and introduces unnecessary complexity, overhead, and frustration for vSphere administrators. Okay, let's start the FUD flying. Who knows what FUD is? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Marketing people, has anybody gone to, and gotten a degree in marketing in here? God, I hope not. You're IT people. Shit. Any salespeople? Salespeople won't raise their hand. They'll be like, no, not me. This is like a required thing for them, is to learn how to spread FUD. You know, it's like politics. Oh, yeah, we did something wrong, but we're gonna, what they do, a pivot. They want to pivot the story. And that's exactly what both sides do. Hyper-V does, Microsoft, and vSphere, VMware. They pivot the stories. So to do cross-platform management, we need migration tools. Not management tools, migration tools. Now, Microsoft does make a migration tool that will go out and pull a VM from vSphere and bring it in as Hyper-V. And it can be done online, cold, or hot, okay? Online or off. I personally have never tried the online, but it might work. I do know that more people have had success when doing offline, cold clones, things like that. How many are ever familiar with a product called PlateSpin? Cool. That is really cool stuff. Well, before Novell bought them, it was really cool. But when they were PlateSpin, they were awesome. I mean, and I guess the product is still the same. It's just owned by a really crappy company. But the product is really awesome because you really don't have to do anything. It's set it and forget it. Okay? So tools like that, there are a couple of them out there. I'm just using that as an example. But there are tools like that out there that make your job a lot easier if you're migrating from one environment to another. My advice on that is always test, test, test. Not every workload is the same. You try and migrate an SAP landscape server is not the same as migrating a file server. okay? That's the converters. VMware, MultiHypervisor Manager. You know they came out with a, you know what a fling is? Everybody know what a fling is? Not that kind of fling. Everybody know what a fling is from VMware? Okay, it's these guys who make things that VMware says, yeah, this is really cool stuff. We're going to let you have your own website, but we're not going to support you. Okay, so engineers come up with this stuff, right? Well, this thing was so cool that they made it into a product. All right, it's called the MultiHypervisor Manager. And it basically goes out and it will manage multiple hypervisors like Xen and HyperV. Not very well, and it only does like 5 things. So it's really, it's kind of young, but I don't know if they will be expanding on it. How many attended, did anybody in here attend VMworld 2008 or 9 or something when Paul Maritz became president? He sat up on a stage during the keynote, which is still available on YouTube, and said that VMware will not be in the business of managing multiple hypervisors. He made that a point in his keynote speech to say that VMware does not want to manage multiple hypervisors. They pulled themselves out of the game. Vendors jumped on that and said, okay, we're going to develop this stuff and sell it as a third party because we know this stuff is coming down the road. Hotlink. Hotlink is actually a product that was best of VMworld 2012, and it will manage multiple hypervisors. It is a Virtual Center plugin. It still requires Virtual Center, though. So it requires Virtual Center to run, and you run it out of Virtual Center. Then we have the SCVM. And that's the article I talked about that they really bash Microsoft on. And there are others. Anybody using anything else? Throw out there so other people can try it? No? Okay. And then last but not least, PowerShell. How many people in here do not know or use PowerShell? One person is admitting to that. Nobody else. So everybody else in here knows how to use PowerShell.
Well, to a degree.
To a degree. Well, I should say, how many people have actually opened the PowerShell console and done something on their VMware environment with PowerShell? Okay. For the people that haven't, and the people who are procrastinating, guess what? A single pane of glass is the only way you're going to do it, right? And PowerShell gives you a single pane of glass for management. Like it or not, it does. You can manage multiple hypervisors in a PowerShell console. Ooh, but it's not the GUI.
Right.
Ooh, I can't click here. Ooh. Yeah, but you can manage everything from a single pane of glass. This is the key right here. Like it or not, Microsoft, when Exchange 2007 came out, said, we're going to develop this scripting language and we're going to make people love it. It's going to be so easy to use. We're going to stamp it on every product that we sell. We're going to make every product that we sell be able to be managed by it. And we're going to invite other vendors to use it and utilize it. And that's exactly what happened. PowerShell has taken off like crazy. I will tell you right now, from a Citrix point of view, if anybody in here is from Citrix, their PowerShell sucks. Sucks. I said it. Citrix, come get me. I can't tell you that it is one of the most poorly programmed PowerShell commandlet functions that when they put out for Zen Server and Zen App and everything else, terrible, just terrible. Okay, hopefully they're going to improve on that. But VMware with PowerCLI, okay, they did it right. They came out and they said, hey, we're going to jump on this, and it's going to be cool. So believe it or not, anybody know the story of PowerCLI and how it started in VMware? Okay, just briefly. 2 guys that worked at VMware decided that, hey, this PowerShell thing is pretty cool. They're making it extensible. Why can't we control our ESX boxes? ESX, not ESXi. Why can't we control our ESX boxes with it? Hey, dude, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do this on the side. Put it together. 2 guys put it together. All right, had it working. Flings weren't around then, right? So they had no way to get it out to the public besides give it to a couple of their friends or people that they in the community that they knew. okay? And that's how it got started. VMware marketing found out about it, hated it. Why? People won't buy vCenter. They'll be managing with this new PowerCLI crap that Microsoft makes and we don't like. We won't make any money on it. They put the lid on this thing for over a year until finally the community raised up so much and said, listen, this is a gem. This is something we need. You can't hide it. You can't do it anymore. And then VMware finally opened the doors and said, this is PowerCLI, which is really cool. So like I said before, if you don't know PowerShell, if you don't understand PowerShell, you don't want to, okay, really it's shame on you. Because I got to tell you, and more times than I can tell you, is people that have come up and talked to me and clients that I've been to and stuff like that, you have to learn this. You really do. You want to be this guy. See, he writes in PowerShell. He's the coolest guy in the world. I tried to use a picture of Mike Burke, but you know, it just wouldn't fit on there. You got to teach an old dog new tricks, right? This is the reality of it. PowerShell is the future of the multi-hypervisor management, believe it or not. PowerShell and PowerCLI, Hyper-V commandlets are native to the new PowerShell core in 2012 and Windows 8. Windows 8.1 and 2012 R2 will have PowerShell version 4. They have over 300 commandlets in there. Over 160 of them are for Hyper-V alone. Okay, so you can do all of that inside of there. The new version of PowerCLI, which I don't think will be released until like, I don't know, it'll be like a month after VMworld or something like that. That's going to have like 300 plus commandlets now for vSphere, which is awesome. Because now you can even do View, and you can do SRM, and you can do all those other products through PowerShell, which is really cool. You don't need to install the Hyper-V role, just the module. That when you go through and you do an install and you select Windows features, you don't need to install the Hyper-V role. You just install the actual management module. And that installs all the commandlets into PowerShell. Windows 7 cannot manage Hyper-V v3 yet. And Windows 8 can't manage Hyper-V v2 yet. Okay? You have to use a product similar to like 5.9s, which I'll show you. 5.9s is a partner company that created this nice little interface for that. That is just a compatibility thing between the teams. I think that's going to get worked out once we get closer to an R2 release date, which is pretty soon. PowerCLI is somewhat vSphere version dependent and requires a VIX install. For anybody who's installed PowerCLI on their local machines, you know that it installs something called VIX. That's just an API thing that has to go in first. Multiple PowerCLI packages for other products, Update Manager, like I said, SRM, stuff like that. And you can run both together, but you have to watch out when you run both together. I'm talking about the single pane of glass. So when you set it up, you enable the Hyper-V role, you install PowerCLI, you modify your POSH profile to add the vSphere snap-ins. Obviously, you don't have to do that if you just follow along with the default install of PowerCLI. It does it all for you. You run PowerShell as administrator and set execution policy unrestricted. I don't know how many times people have come back to me and said, I opened up PowerShell window for the first time and it tells me that I can't execute any scripts. I'm sorry, was I in the way of that? Okay. And the reason for that is because you have to set your execution policy. That's a security thing. And then remember the gotcha. For whatever reason, VMware and Microsoft use the same commandlet names to do the work. Get-VM. Guess what Microsoft calls the commandlet to do get-VM? Get-VM. Guess what VMware calls the PowerCLI commandlet to do get-VM? Get-VM. Well, when you run it, who wins? Whoever shows up first in the list. If it's a function, if it's a module, or if it's a snap-in. vSphere still uses, or PowerCLI still uses snap-ins. Okay? So as it is right now, I'm sorry, function snap-in module. So as it is right now, vSphere wins. You do a get-VM, it's going to say, well, I'm not connected to a vCenter server. And you're like, well, I wanted to do it on Hyper-V. Why the hell is vSphere telling me it can't connect to a vCenter server? Well, because that commandlet won. You have to prefix the commandlet with the module name, and I'll show you how to do that. These are the commands that you would type to find out which commands are used in both modules. Okay, there's a white paper coming out about this after the release of the next version of Hyper-V. So I want to get through this. So I'm going to do a little bit of demo. We'll do Q&A, and then you can go about your business. Anybody have any questions real quick? No? How much time do I have?
We have about like 2 minutes.
15? Okay. All righty. Now, hopefully my virtual machine hasn't frozen, which it probably has. Nope, it's up there. Cool. All right, so the first thing I'm going to show you is something to get out of the way real quick is a multi-hypervisor manager that I mentioned called 5.9s. 5.9s was the first company to come out as a Microsoft partner with a multi-hypervisor management application. They do make a free version. They make a free version and a paid version. But as you can see, this is the HyperV Manager for 5.9s. Server 5.9 Manager for Hyper-V. Okay, they do make a 5.9s manager for vSphere. They will be combining them. Don't worry about it. But this is how you would manage Hyper-V outside of using HyperV Manager built in or SCVM. Okay? You can use this. What's the other case that you could use this? Anybody know? It was mentioned in the last session. When you download the free version of Hyper-V, how do you manage the free version of Hyper-V? Pardon me? PowerShell. PowerShell is one of them. Why is that? There's no GUI, right? Yeah. It's like core. There's no GUI.
You can install hyperV Manager on Win 7 or Win 8 or something.
Right, exactly. The other way you do it is if you had a Windows 8 or Windows 7 machine or a 2012 server machine, you could run the VMM or Hyper-V Manager off of that and connect to that Hyper-V box and manage it from there. The alternative is to use a product like this. Okay, so this is just an alternative. I found this really cool when you're dealing with a small installation that is only dealing with like 2, 3 Hyper-V hosts that really doesn't want to get into the complexities of learning VMM and all this. 5.9s makes things a lot easier. And you know what 5.9s is doing in the background? PowerShell. Every time you click something in 5.9s, it's executing a PowerShell script. Did you know that in SCCM, in Orchestrator, and in VMM, every mouse click that you do, that PowerShell is running in the background? Did you know that the whole SCCM or Orchestrator console is PowerShell driven? It's all PowerShell.
So SCVM isn't free, like vCenter isn't free.
Mm-hmm.
And it brings to the table things like live motion, vMotion kind of things. So we have to pay to get that functionality, right? Does this let me live motion without SCVM?
Yes,
No shit.
because Hyper-V is, live motion is part of Hyper-V.
It's part of there, right? I just can't trigger it without PowerShell.
Correct. You can trigger live motion. His question is that in vCenter, in order to do vMotions in vCenter, you have to have, vMotions in vSphere, you have to have vCenter, right? Hyper-V, you don't need that. Hyper-V, you can execute a live migration directly from PowerShell. That's a zero cost right there. It's not required. There's no management tool required to do that. Okay?
How much is the paid version of 5.9s?
39 bucks? Something like that? I don't know. You'd have to look it up. I have no idea.
Features?
Yeah. Yeah, it adds a bunch of features. You can do multiple users and stuff like that, and yeah, it's pro version or something. I don't know if anybody's looking it up.
That's per user, no matter how many managed nodes.
You'd have to look it up. I don't know. I don't know.
That's fair.
I don't know.
I can ask that.
So that's 5.9. Anybody going to VMworld, they'll have a booth there too, by the way, that they told me that. This is the HyperV Manager, if nobody's ever opened that up. Okay? So when you have a machine created, this is where you would go in and look at your machines, see what their usage is. Just, you're seeing some familiar thing here with vCenter. You can do a lot of the same things that you can do in vCenter. You just don't have the nice tabbed interface. Okay? I bitched about that. I said, you gotta put in a tabbed interface because people that are coming over from VMware are gonna wanna see those tabs. People have gotten trained to click on that performance tab, and they've gotten trained to click on the console tab, so on and so forth. So Microsoft in there, they actually listened, and they are gonna be creating a different type of interface for this. They wanna stick with the MMC look and feel, which really sucks, but they wanna stick with that. So this is where you would see everything. You can look at your memory, your networking. Again, when you click something here in the actions, it's executing PowerShell. There may be an API. I think when you get down to the networking layer, some of the networking stuff, when you're doing virtual switches, I still think it does PowerShell, but I also think it talks to the API layer. I can't remember for sure. But almost 95% of it is PowerShell. This is where you would right-click on a machine and say, migrate. To another host. You would have multiple hosts here under HyperV Manager. I only have one host. I have test one, which is, obviously on my laptop. But you would have multiple hosts, and you can see all the machines under the host, and then you'd be able to click and drag a machine to another host, and you'd be able to, do all that kind of stuff, just like in vCenter. Now, what's one of the key differences with vCenter and HyperV Manager? What did VMware come out with about a year and a half ago, right before VMworld 2012 with vCenter? No? Something called a web client? Okay? HyperV doesn't have that. Okay? Not saying they won't in the future, but they don't have it. I can tell you that the HyperV, just one second, I see you. No, she's standing behind you. Okay. Now I totally lost where I was thinking. No, okay, the web client. When VMware came out with that web client, it sucked. I don't know how many of you actually tried it, but it couldn't do anything. It was like, holy crap, yeah, you can look at a machine, you can start, you can stop it, but you can't do anything else. They've had it forever, but they never promoted it. You could always execute it by going to the ESX box and clicking on Open Web Client. But they never made a big deal out of it because it couldn't do anything, Now they decided, ooh, this is the future. We got to make it a web client because nobody wants to install a client on the machine in order to manage it, right? Microsoft has to start, thinking the same way. They got to come out with a web version in order to manage that because they don't want people having to install the HyperV management tools on a machine just to manage the HyperV. Yes, sir?
That's the app controller.
Yeah, but that is a separate
Separate product.
right, exactly. I'm talking about something that's actually integrated when you install HyperV, yeah. But that's good. That's a good point. Yes, sir?
Well, my question was, I don't have HyperV Manager, but like SSO, is that integrated?
Single sign-on?
Yeah.
Well, how do you mean? I don't understand the question. Well, yeah, it is. It's just like in vCenter now. In order to install vCenter 5.1, and again, on my soapbox, the requirement of SSO in vCenter 5.1 is crap.
Oh, God, it's awful.
Okay, so in order to install 5.1, you have to install SSO, which is BS to me. Okay, but HyperV everything is Active Directory integrated in HyperV. I mean, everything. Yeah. All right, that is the Virtual Machine Manager, and briefly I'm going to go through the PowerShell stuff, if you guys don't mind, which I'm sure you don't. So this is a command that I had up on the screen, right? This is a Windows 8 box that I'm running, virtual. And I've got the HyperV management tools installed. I think I installed the role, and then I uninstalled it. I can't remember. Quick sidebar. Anybody know what happens when you enable the role, HyperV role, on a Windows 8 machine? Anybody? Oh, God. Yes, Mike. What? Kinda. Yeah, he's right. He's right. What happens is that, how many of you ever heard of DISM? D-I-S-M? Okay. It actually executes a DISM command that goes out and virtualizes your Windows 8 machine and makes it a virtual machine inside of HyperV core. So now when you reboot, after you enable that role, it's actually running HyperV, and the Windows 8 machine that you were running is inside of it. Okay? And then when you click the role off, and when you click it off and you click OK, DISM is running the opposite command to take the machine back out and make it a physical and lay it back down on the hardware and pulling the hypervisor out. To me, that is really cool stuff, that you can do that just by clicking a damn checkbox.
Does it take more storage?
I'm sorry?
Does it take more storage?
No, your storage never changes. Your storage never changes because it's the exact same size as the machine you had. It doesn't change. Yep. So we run this command. If you have both installed, you have to have the PowerCLI installed, okay, and the snap-ins enabled, which give you all the VMware stuff, right? And you run this command, and it comes back and it gives you two columns. It says first the actual commandlet name. Those who are not familiar with PowerShell, commandlets are your friend. Commandlets control everything. So this is a commandlet name, this is a snap-in name, and this is a module name. The snap-in name are for those old crappy written applications that still use snap-ins. Snap-ins are like 80s style in PowerShell. VMware will be changing that. They'll be migrating all their snap-ins to modules eventually. But for now, everything is a snap-in. Microsoft, everything is a module, of course, because they develop PowerShell. So when you execute a command, and you say, I want to execute it against VMware, my VMware environment, you have to prefix it with this, /stop-VM. That's the only way it's going to know that it's got to be sent to the VM environment. Okay? If you want to do it for Microsoft or HyperV, you have to prefix it with actually the name HyperV, which this is, I've got the Azure stuff on here too, so you get a bunch of MS Online, but there's a module called HyperV. So you would say HyperV / and then stop-VM. And that would send it to the HyperV host. Multi-management hypervisors, applications, they're already doing this in the background. They're already prefixing that stuff for you. Okay? Or they will be when they actually develop them. To get an actual list, and when I do like a get VM, see how it comes back right away and says, you're not currently connected to any servers, and the resource was from VI server connection exception, VI core commandlets. VMware bitching at you saying, you're not connected, I can't run it. Well, I didn't want to run it against you, I wanted to run it against HyperV. It doesn't know that. And part of that reason is because it shows up in the list first. If I can find my command that I did that. If you ever do, this is something that all PowerShell, people learning PowerShell, you really want to learn to get to use this. Because this tells you all the commandlets that are available. But when you do that, notice how they're separated into command types. This is when I came back and told you that it's all in hierarchical order. Okay? Functions, snap-ins, modules, in that order. All right? When you're pertaining simply to commandlets. We're not talking about aliases, which are basically you're changing, making an alias to do something. But as you go down the list here, you can see we're in functions. Once we get past functions, I got a lot of commandlets on here. Oh, there's a commandlet. See, it switches over to commandlets. Okay? Commandlets are actually the ones that you use. Notice the commandlet, now you're starting to see HyperV ones show up. That's the module name it's under. Okay? Now, I will say that there are some tools that will make this easier for you when you're just learning it. Okay? One of them I can recommend is Power GUI. Power GUI is still made, right? Mike? Power GUI? Power GUI was made by Quest software. It gives you a graphical interface to PowerShell. It's really cool. And they have add-on packs. So they can make this a lot easier for you if you really want to go back to that GUI. Okay? I highly recommend that. There's also one called PowerShell Advanced or something like that. And I've only got 2 minutes left, so right now I have to stop and ask, anybody have any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Stupid, simple one.
There's no stupid, simple questions.
My main reason against Hyper-V is just the patching, the Windows patching. How do you combat that?
Run core. And the reason why I say that, run the free version or core. And the reason why I say that is because on a typical Patch Tuesday, you could have over, what, somewhere in between 10, 15, 20 patches that come out for Windows Server alone. But when on the core version, if you look at that Patch Tuesday, they have a separation between Server 2012 and then Server Core. And Server Core has like 2. Okay? And the reason why, because the attack surface is so much smaller. Now, in large implementations, I never, ever, ever, ever tell them to enable or to run Hyper-V on a full GUI installation. There's no reason for it. You should have it remotely managed. There's no reason to run a GUI on every single server. Okay? You should be remotely managing that stuff. Now, some installations say, oh, well, our operations staff wants to RDP into a box to fix it, and they don't know how to use, well, guess what? That's why they make RSAT. The RSAT tools are free from Microsoft, and you can manage any server from it from a local machine. Okay? From a security perspective, there is no reason to run the GUI when you're dealing with that volume of Hyper-V hosts. Did that answer your question? Cool. Anyone else? My time is up. Thank you very much.